Hello, my name is Midshipman Matthew Benjamin. In this video for the steering gear test, I will be referencing the Code of Federal Regulations CFR, Title 46, Shipping, Chapter 1, Coast Guard Department of Homeland Security, under Subchapter D, Tank Vessels, Part 35, Operations, Subpart 35.20, Navigation. So in all, it will be 46 CFR 35.20-10 steering gear test. Some common parts that I will be referring to throughout this recording is the ram, which is the big metal slide that moves the tiller. The hydraulic cylinder, which houses the hydraulic oil used to push the ram. The rudder stock, which holds the rudder and is the central pinion. Also, that will be discussed will be the pump, the motor, and the hydraulic oil tank in the control stations. Before the actual steering gear test takes place, it is very important to go around the steering gear itself, check for any leaks, check the hydraulic tank levels as depicted in this video before we jump to the next video. It is very important to note that while we are discussing the steering gear, the number 1 and number 2 steering gear pumps have different purposes. On most ships, like the MV Maersk Atlanta, the number 1 steering gear pump is located on both the main switchboard and the emergency switchboard. What this means is that typically the high-speed side of the number 1 steering gear pump is on the main switchboard because it has more power available, whereas when the ship blacks out, the emergency switchboard provides power to the low speed side of the number 1 steering gear pump. The number 2 steering gear pump is always located on the main switchboard. So the number 1 steering gear is the emergency operation pump for the steering gear. Here we can see the number 1 steering gear control panel. You can see the 2 green buttons located on the second row on the left. The left side button is the low run, and the button that is lit right next to it to the right is the high run. That is referring to the different speeds available to the number 1 steering gear pump. So for the purpose of this test, it is important to note that it'll be tested in both the high and low settings. So while the pump was running, there was another operator, the first assistant engineer, that was manually controlling the rudder itself right next to me. It is important to note that while this operator is controlling the rudder or the steering gear unit, the control was in local, not remote, which would allow the system to be controlled from the bridge. Here is a video of the first assistant engineer pressing the port and starboard buttons to control which way the steering gear moves the rudder. It is important that while doing a manual test that both directions are tested and the rudder is actually moving. So while somebody is pressing the button, they are also looking behind them to see if the rams are moving in conjunction with the rudder and tiller. As you can see, this is what the steering gear actually looks like when it is being operated. To discuss some parts, the big 2 long shafts are called the rams. They connect to the crosshead. The crosshead is what moves the tiller which eventually moves the rudder. The tiller is that U-shaped metal piece that's underneath the crosshead that is moving around a pinion. So, as the steering gear pumps pump hydraulic oil into the cylinders, if more hydraulic oil is pumped into the left cylinder, then the right cylinder will get compressed, meaning that the steering gear tiller will go ahead and move counterclockwise. This particular unit on board the Maersk Atlanta has 4 steering gear pumps. So as you can see, there are 2 motors on the starboard side of the steering gear. Here is the hydraulic oil tank. There are 2 located on each side. Here on the farthest tank, you can see that is where the tank is. You can see the level gauge on the right side. On the top, there is both a high and low level alarm. You can also see below that on the control panel, there are solenoid valves. The solenoid valve that is highest is the unloader. Here is another overview of the 2 rams connecting to the crosshead. The crosshead has a centralized pinion which connects to the tiller, so when the rams move, the tiller also moves. These 2 limit switches are what prevent the steering gear from continuing to move once it's reached these positions. So when they are activated, they send a signal to whatever steering gear pump is currently on and will shut them off or return it back to the center at 0. Thank you for watching.